Shields up, Ironbreakers, and welcome back to Monster Hunter Wilds. Today we're once again going to be talking about performance because a lot of you guys linked me to this Reddit thread, and there's a couple of theories as to what the causes of the performance issues might be. So we're going to be diving into those. I did some testing on my own, so without any further ado, let's just jump right in. So this is a Reddit thread by D.E. Tilmarande, sorry if I'm butchering your name, where he goes on to describe an experience that he's been doing with Monster Hunter Wilds where he was playing on his account, which doesn't really have a whole lot of DLC, and then he swapped over to a friend's account that had tons of DLC on their account, and that somehow improved his performance. Then he tested this on two different PCs. He tested it with DLC, without DLC, and all of that stuff, and apparently his theory is that there's this DLC presence checker that Capcom uses in order to check whether or not you have purchased any DLC for the game, and basically the more DLC you have purchased, the more optimum this function becomes, and the less DLC you have, the more aggressive this function is, and therefore that causes performance issues. Now, as he did these tests, he eventually created a mod in order to be able to, just simulate having all of the DLC, and he expresses that that gave him a significant boost in performance. There's actually a video here of this. I already fast forwarded to the relevant part. And you guys can see that he is here in the hub, and he is running the game at like 29 FPS. This is running in windowed mode. I think this is running on a laptop. And he's running this in windowed mode, 31 FPS in camp, and this is without his mod turned on. So the mod that enables all of the DLC that has come out for Monster Hunter Wilds. Then if we fast forward, he enables the mod, which supposedly grants him, like, I don't know if it grants him or if it just simulates having all of the DLC, right? And then that is going to improve things significantly. As you can see now, it's running at 60 FPS, 47, 60, as it's loading into camp. And now that he's at camp, you can see 43, 55, 51, 49. This is in the Scarlet Forest, though, but he goes back to the Windward Plains camp, which is where he did the first test. And in here, you can see it's at 47, 38, 48. So it's significantly better than before. Right, because if you look at the footage previously here, you can see that we're getting like 40, 56, but then as he moves, again, he's in the Scarlet Forest there, but as he moves to the camp, 27, 26, 29, 31, and then you go back to the other footage, and it's significantly better, right? 43, 46, 47, all of that jazz. Now, I'm not sure if this is because of the DLC checker, if there's something going on with the hardware, yada, yada, yada. Could be a million different things. But regardless of that, I was like, oh, this is interesting. And this is something that I actually think I can test. Now, I'm not 100% sure if the test is going to be relevant or not, but I figured I'd do it anyway. So there's a function that you can do when it comes to Steam, wherein you can just go to any individual video game and you can basically turn off specific DLC for that game. I did this during my Return to World live stream. If you guys remember that, I turned off Iceborne so that we wouldn't have the Iceborne features when we were playing during Monster Hunter World. And basically, I just came into Monster Hunter Wilds and I disabled everything with the exception of high-resolution texture pack, because I usually play with high-resolution texture pack. Not to mention, I wanted to really squeeze as much juice out of my hardware as possible to see if there could be any potential gains. So I even turned down a couple of settings in terms of like optimization, like frame generation, upscaling, all of that stuff, to really see if there was any room for gains by turning off the DLC. I'll be showing you guys the results of my test later. But as you guys can see, we have his test here. I already showed it to you. I'll have a link to his test in the description if you guys want to check it out. I might upload my own testing videos separately so that you guys can check that out. Now, some of the things that you guys might be asking is, but does this actually work? Does the game actually detect whether or not you have the DLC if you turn it off in Steam? In my opinion, yes, but then again, I don't know exactly how this DLC presence checker works when it comes to the function that it's doing in game and all of that stuff. So one of the things that I've noticed, because people were asking me on Twitter as to whether or not the DLC Palico would identify that I didn't have the DLC, and I would say that yes, because for instance, among some of the DLC that I do have, because my version of the game is like digital deluxe or whatever. This is, by the way, the game was provided to me by Capcom. Full disclosure, I've said this a million times in all of my videos so that everybody's aware. But as you guys can see, whenever I turn the DLC back on, there's even a message in the game that's like, oh, look at all this DLC you just unlocked. But you guys can see that in here, for instance, you have the hairstyle, Hero's Top Knot, Refined Warrior, Wild Braids, character vouchers, all of that stuff. And when I turned all of this stuff off, you can see that it doesn't have the mark here that says that it's owned. So I would imagine that this pretty much simulates not having the DLC. Now, there's also something that the Reddit poster mentions, which is he really noticed a lot of increases up to like 100 pieces of DLC being installed. I'm pretty sure that however much I have in here, I haven't really counted it, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to reach 100 pieces of DLC. But this is all the DLC that I have. This is the only way that I really have to test this. I'm not going to be messing around with like mods and stuff like that. So, you know. But basically, that's the testing that I did. Now, I do have 2 computers to test this on, and that's basically what I ended up doing. So we have the 2 tests here. In case you guys are wondering what the hardware is, I think I separated that in here. So for the first test, we have an AMD Ryzen 9 7950 X3D 16-core processor. Now, I know a lot of guys are going to say, well, but that's completely overkill, right? That's a really good processor. It's like, yeah. It's the processor for my gaming rig. It's not like the top of the top of the top, but it's a very good processor. At least at the time when I purchased the computer, it was very good, and I think it's still very good nowadays. But regardless of that, the author of the post even mentions here, at the very beginning of his post, he even says, also, quick note, everything below mostly hits low and mid-tier CPUs, but I think the effect will be quite noticeable even on more high-end ones. So if my CPU is high-end, then theoretically I should also be able to notice this increase. So it's on this CPU, it's on this GPU, the AMD Radeon 7900 XTX, and I'm using the recommended driver version, so because unfortunately the latest AMD drivers are not very good. There's issues with both Path of Exile 2 as well as Monster Hunter Wilds, so I'm using the recommended driver version, which is downgraded from the current latest drivers. But anyways, that's our first testing environment, and basically this is without any of the DLCs installed. You guys can see right here, we're on VLC. You guys will notice that there's some fluctuation in frames because I took advantage while I was messing around with the settings, and I was like, well, if the game's not in the foreground, I might as well cap its FPS much lower because I don't need to be paying too much attention to what's happening. But as you can see, all the DLC is turned off at the beginning of the video. And I went through the settings so that you guys can look at it. So all of this stuff is disabled in terms of upscaling and frame gen. Again, the reason I did this is because this would give much more room for potential performance improvements. We should see a more noticeable frame increase because usually the way that I play is I play with upscaling set to quality and frame generation, FSR. And with that, usually it goes above 100 FPS, and because of capture settings on my capture card and all of that stuff, the limit is going to be 120. So even if we were getting noticeable frame increases, it probably wouldn't show up as much. So this way, I turned all that stuff off so that if there were significant performance increases, we would see it going above 60 FPS or something like that. But yeah, these are all the settings on here. Like I said, I might upload these videos separately if you guys really want to watch that. And you guys can see all the visual settings that I have set up and all of that. And then what I did was I went on and I hunted chemetries because to me, one of the best ways to actually see whether or not performance is stable is to go and you hunt a monster. Now, this is very early in the game so that it's very easy for people to kind of like replicate this testing environment. This is a fresh save. This is after you go back to the village and you're allowed to kind of just like free roam and you just hunt the first chemetries that you see, right? And as you can see, we're hovering around 54 FPS, 51, but basically throughout this whole hunt, the FPS varies between 45 and 55, depending on just how much fire that is on screen at any given time. So not particularly good performance, especially for the hardware that we have, but again, 4K native, no upscaling, no frame generation, yada, yada, yada. And again, this is the version without any DLC installed, which according to the theory of the Reddit author, this would be the worst performance that, not the worst, but like the worst performance that we're going to be getting in our testing environment. So as you guys can see, 40 something, 50 something, depending on whatever happens to be happening on screen. And it's pretty much like this throughout the whole hunt, right? So now if we go through, I went ahead after killing it, quit without saving, and then I turned back all the DLC on. I go through the process here throughout the video. Then we launch the game again, and then after launching it again, we go straight in and we do the exact same thing. Settings are very much all the same settings that I showed you previously. I would just go through and we hunt the Chemetries again. And as you can see, performance is still pretty much the same. We're at 50 FPS right now. This is hunting Chemetries during fallow, where there's a lot of like fog and particles on screen and all of that stuff. 51 FPS. But again, it hovers between 45, 55, which no real big noticeable gains, especially when compared to his performance test where he goes from like 20-something to 30-something FPS, from between 20 and 30 FPS to like 40 and 50. So for us, I didn't really experience that on this computer. Now, you guys might say, yeah, but your GPU is really good and your CPU is also really good, so you're probably already reaching like the bottleneck, and everything that you can't get better is other performance issues like actual rendering problems and so on and so forth. Okay, so in that case, we're going to be swapping to a different test machine. So this machine that I have is my streaming computer. I usually tend to use this one whenever it comes to, you know, trying to use lower hardware. I understand you guys are going to look at this. You still have like 32 gigs of RAM and a 7900 processor. Yeah, but the GPU is an Arc B580, which is like the rough equivalent of a 4060, give or take. So basically, performance gains would be much more noticeable on this system. Now, on this system, I will be using frame gen and all of that stuff because I'm not really going to be capping the capture stuff because it's not really going to break 120 FPS or anything like that. So, yeah, we're going to be jumping in, frame gen, upscaling, all of that stuff. I'll show you guys the settings here on the menu. This is just me showing once again that all the DLC is turned off. Then we go through the options, and as you guys can see, in here we're playing on 1440p as opposed to 4K because it's a weaker GPU, etc., weaker PC in general. We're using XeSS for upscaling, which is Intel's upscaling. You guys can like pause the video if you want to look at the specific, you know, quality settings and stuff that I have for the visuals. Then we're going to be hunting. And you guys are like, whoa, this is better performance than the other computer. Yeah, because I did not have frame gen on and upscaling and all of that stuff, which gives you massive performance gains. So this is going to be the without DLC version. And as you can see, we're looking at 60 FPS. I think this one, it hovers between 60 and 70, give or take. As you guys can see in here, we're at 70 FPS. There was a spike on the no DLC, on the one with DLC, but it was because I was like behind a rock, so the field of view narrowed a little bit, and it gave me a bit of a spike in FPS at that point. But yeah, as you guys can see, I would say this is between 65, 75 FPS throughout most of the hunt. Again, if you guys really want, I will upload these videos so that you guys can go check it out for yourselves. But yeah, we get the Chemetries here. Then I go back and I do exactly the same thing that I did last time, where I go through and I enable all of the DLC again. And then we go through and we boot up the game again. And as you guys can see, still waiting on the Chemetries to spawn. Boom. Again, on that same range of FPS between 65 and 75. We did get better FPS when you go into the Chemetries' Nook. It goes up to like 90, but that's just because of the location, and that happens in both instances with and without the DLC. So, what is the conclusion to be drawn from this? Conclusion is either the hardware that I have isn't really affected by this performance increase that you can potentially get, because I'm not going to instantly claim that this person is wrong. I genuinely just don't know. I came in here to test. I came in here to see if I could replicate the problem that they were having with having DLC and not having DLC. Now, do I maybe not have enough DLC to provoke the performance boost that he's saying? Because he says that the performance increase goes up until like 100 pieces of DLC. So therefore, maybe if I had more DLC, the performance could have improved more. But I didn't really notice a huge boost between having the DLC and not having the DLC. Again, could be hardware, could be something else, but that's just my 2 cents on the situation. Regardless of that, I do hope, because they did reach out to Capcom to provide support, and it seems like they've worked with someone from Capcom in the past, maybe, with Dragon's Dogma 2. At least that's something that they mention in their Reddit thread as well. And if that's true, then hopefully there's already like a back channel that makes it easier to supply this type of data, that maybe Capcom can analyze it and all of that stuff. But yeah, at this point in time, I'm unable to replicate the issue. I'm curious to see if more people are able to replicate the issue or not, because to me, as far as I'm concerned, anything that leads to performance improvements for Monster Hunter Wilds, that would be a good thing. So yeah, but a lot of people were asking me, Rurikhan, what's your take on this? Like, what do you think about this thing? And it's like, if it is true, I hope that they're able to fix it. But yeah, that's it. I wasn't able to really replicate it, and on my end, I couldn't really tell if this is something that is happening or not. But anyways, that's going to be it for now. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe, bell notification icon, all of that jazz. My apologies for my voice. I've fallen a little bit sick this week, so I'm going to be unable to put out a whole lot of content, so I'm really, really sorry. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.